So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Yiming Xiao. Dr. Xiao is an accomplished researcher and a leading figure in the intersection of computer science and health technology. So he currently serves as an assistant professor in computer science and software engineering at Concordia University. So in recognition of his work, he holds the prestigious title of Concordia University Research Chair in Intuitive and Intelligent Surgical Technologies. Dr. Xiao is also an active member of the Applied AI Institute and the School of Health at Concordia, and he's an FRQS Junior 1 research scholar. Dr. Xiao completed his PhD in biomedical engineering at McGill in 2016, and following his doctorate, he joined the Perform Center as a postdoctoral fellow from 2018 to 2020. He expanded his research horizons as a CIHR and brain scan postdoctoral fellow at the Roberts Research Institute of Western University. His research is truly at the cutting edge of medical technology. Dr. Xiao combines innovative techniques in medical imaging principles, computer vision, mixed reality, and machine deep learning. So his work aims to enhance the efficiency and accuracy of image-based diagnosis and image-guided surgery, ultimately contributing to better patient outcomes. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Xiao with us today to share his insights and expertise. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Yiming Xiao. Thank you, Dr. Xiao.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm very honored to be here and trying to introduce the work that we have done in the lab in the topic of surgical. Although we work primarily on neurosurgical applications, we have also been expanding our application to other parts of the body as well. So today I'm going to introduce a little bit more about human-centered designs for the next generation of surgical AI and virtual reality tools, which could be very relevant for a lot of future applications, especially in terms of how we formulate these tools. So surgery has a very long history. The first trepanation may have occurred up to 10,000 years ago. So that time, people might think that, okay, if you're trying to have a certain level of craniotomy, and then maybe actually you can drive away the evil spirit, and it can be even closer to the god. So some of the more religious practice as well. Globally, there are 310 million major surgeries that performed each year, and with 40 to 50 millions in the USA alone. And however, this estimate that up to 15% of the patients will have serious postoperative morbidity, and also 5 to 15% will be remitted within 30 days. So this basically signifies the incredible need to very well perform the pre-surgical planning, and as well as doing very careful surgical monitoring as well to avoid this kind of situation. So this really gave us the motivation for image-guided surgery, and for my specific domains, image-guided neurosurgery. So the general idea of image-guided surgery is very similar to your GPS system, because within the body, we really don't see what's really going on. And for surgery, we want to have minimize the trauma as well. So trying to guide the surgeon within the body to reach the surgical target is pretty much like if you're trying to drive in a foggy day, and really rely on your GPS to guide you through the right road and also reach your final destination. And usually for image-guided surgery, we'll have multiple components. The first one, you have an interface that will be able to guide you through the preoperative plan and also the medical images you have taken before. And you also have a tracking system that will be able to correlate the surgical plan in the digital world and also the physical world that you're actually operating on the patients. So there are a lot of integration of trying to identify the key anatomical structures as well as pathologies in the preoperative images. And there are also challenges with this. because for a lot of you probably have experienced those surgical navigation software. Typically, what you see is going to be the 2D slices of the pre-operative images, and then you have a lot of different buttons trying to figure out how to use them in a sequence or a combination. So this actually is a lot of a learning curve already. And even worse, for nowadays, we have the advancement of medical imaging technologies. You provide a lot more different information. For example, you have the angiographies, and then for brain surgery, you can also have the functional MRI or choreography. So these are trying to help with the surgeon to make judgment whether this type of tissue should be resected and how bad the consequences will be if you remove these kind of tumorous areas or suspicious area that could actually still have cancer remaining. With these kind of data incorporated, this really amounts to a giant amount of complexity for visualizing, also understanding these data. And at the same time, for dealing with these kind of data with a little bit more simplified 2D interface, this will also place a very high demand in terms of the cognitive demand and as well as the perceptual demand for the physician as well. So really, we're trying to figure out how do we actually basically design the software system for the surgical software. This is going to be a very important tool. So with the more traditional surgical planning, typically you will have technician to help you segmenting all these tissues and the key pathology, for example, tumors. And for example, for some of those high-end surgical navigation software, they do also come with the semi-automatic segmentation tools as well. However, it's still very time-consuming. So in our daily lives, we have experienced the self-driving car, hopefully in the road, down the road. We have also experienced the augmented reality classes, and Meta just debuted their latest version. It's quite exciting, as well as the facial recognition on your phone, trying to unlock the system and the information you will need. So all these systems in our daily lives, utilizing technologies from the field of computer vision, machine learning, deep learning, and also mixed reality. With these kind of development in the technical hardware and also software, we hope that this might be very useful for surgical planning and also surgical application in general. So this is really great hope. However, there's also challenges. Again, a lot of time for deep learning and machine learning algorithms, these are typically black box algorithms, and understanding how it works is a little bit difficult. And as some of you might know, FDA approval for these kind of algorithm clinical use, you do need to provide some clues on how things really work so you can rationalize things. And at the same time, for a machine, you want to talk to a machine, then there's also a problem of interactability. How do we receive information from the machine so that we understand whatever it's outputted and then we can actually put trust on it? And as well as visualization of what the output should be and how do we actually maximize the perception advantage of using these kind of results. And very finally, how do we utilize these kind of information to make decision and the feedback, so that feedback is going to be very in time and also very useful to the actual clinical practice. Because I think a lot of us do know that technology is great, but if we don't really well consider the human factors, we can actually have a negative impact, and it's actually making our work even worse. So human-centered design is a relatively new word. It's first coined in 1970s, and it's later on popularized by cognitive scientist Donald Norman in his book, The Design of Everyday Things. So if you're really interested in this kind of field, I would encourage trying to take a read, and some of the books is quite interesting. In general, the human-centered design is basically turning users' thoughts, feelings, and goals into specific product requirements. So this is a little bit more commonplace in your cell phone design, like user interface for web browsers. However, for a lot of the software design, even hardware design for medical cases, is also quite useful. In summary, there are 5 general principles when it comes to human-centered design, or how do we define human-centered designs. The number 1 is perceptual models. Basically means that you need to simplify the structure of the task for the software or the hardware that people want to use for very intuitive actions. The second important part is feedback. So make the results of an action clearly and quickly communicated. So these very two basic front principles are really dominating the design world today we have for software and hardware. And more specifically, there are three more nuanced principles. So number one, mapping. We need to establish a clear connection between the intended results as well as the and the required actions. So we know that whatever we're trying to do, we have expected outcome, so it's not going to mislead us anywhere else. And secondly, we have the signifier, meaning that we need to provide the visible signs, visuals, and sound, communicate the meaning to the user. Quite often, we have this in the phone as well. So when you're pressing the button, you actually hear the sound. So you feel like things are really pressed down. And then there's also affordance, meaning that employ cues to indicate what an object does without instructions. So it's really trying to make sure that whatever we do in the workflow, we don't really need a lot of time-consuming reading for the user manuals. So this is really helpful for making whatever we have very intuitive to use, and also create less of confusion to mislead the auctions. So in my lab, we have developed a lot of different AI and VR tools that utilizing the general principle of human-centered designs. However, today I'm going to highlight some of the applications we have in 4 different applications. So includes Parkinson's disease, brain cancer, and cerebrovascular disorder, and lastly, lung cancer. So the first 3 are majorly on the neurological conditions, and the last one it's more on the other side of the body. So first, let's try to take a look at the application in Parkinson's disease. And more specifically for this application, we're trying to design a surgical trajectory planning software using eye gaze in the virtual reality. And in this case, we're trying to practice the principle on how do we efficiently incorporate human behaviors while trying to do surgical planning in the surgical VR system. Some of you might know. So deep brain stimulation is a minimally invasive surgical procedure for the treatment of drug-resistant Parkinson's disease. The success of the surgery really relies on the precise placement of the electrode inside a structure called subthalamic nucleus, or short for STN, while avoid all the vital structures such as the blood vessels. So as you can see here, the blood vessel is quite dense, and the structure itself to be simulated is really small. It's almost the size of a lentil, the bigger lentil. So there's a high requirement for precision and also safety as well. And in most of the surgical software we're trying to use is basically slice by slice manner, trying to figure out what exactly the right angle and to actually hit the right target. So this can be very, very time consuming, especially trying to imagine or visualize a 3D structure with only 2D slices of the medical images. So this comes kind of a natural calling for using virtual reality, which is really, really good to understand the spatial arrangement of anatomy, which has a lot more complex arrangement than typical simple geometric shapes in everyday objects. So this is what we proposed. We have proposed a system called Lucid. This is a virtual neurosurgical studio we developed based on the Unity game engine. And in this case, we'll be able to visualize all the key structures for planning the deep brain stimulation surgery, including the subcortical structures in the brain, as well as the blood vessels. And at the same time, you can also inject additional information such as the chartography, and then the surgeon will be able to navigate the space and trying to propose the best options. And this system has been patented in Canada and the USA. And this is a work done by my great research assistant, Owen Helen, who has graduated. So how do we actually do the surgical planning? So this is actually done with 3 steps. We're combining 2 important user interaction paradigms. The first one is called the voodoo doll interaction. So we know that we're trying to improve the precision, and the larger the object you have, the more precision you will naturally have. So instead of really targeting a original size brain, which is very small for the surgical target, we're going to have a large model on the side. And then we'll be able to only annotate the larger model to improve our accuracy and precision. And then as a voodoo doll, whatever action you apply on this model is going to be transferred to the actual brain model. So this is going to give you a very precise and accurate annotation for where the simulation site should be. And then afterwards, we're utilizing the inherent behavior of people who are trying to inspect a clear path for inserting the deep brain stimulation electrode inside the brain to reach the target. So during the whole process in the 3D navigation, you definitely will have to kind of move around and trying to figure out where it is by looking into the brain model. But the common sense is that you're going to look first and then place it afterwards. Why don't we just combine them two at the same time? So this is our plan. Basically, directly looking at a brain model, trying to find a clear path. And once we feel like this is a great way to go, and then we just press confirm. And then your eye gaze or line of sight automatically become the surgical trajectory. So this is very efficient. And very lastly, if you remember the principle for surgical tool design is the feedback. So here we do give the feedback in terms of the surgical risks, such as distance to blood vessels, and also the accuracy of the targeting. So the user will have the chance to revise their surgical plan based on their feedbacks. So here's a little bit more visualization of actual virtual reality environment. So this is the step one with the surgical target selection. We have a enlarged model for you to tag all the annotations you need. And then afterwards, we're going to use the line of sight or gaze tracking to select the clear path for the surgical trajectories, and then we'll be able to confirm it. And once it's confirmed, we have all the feedback needed for the surgical quality. So this is also great for training as well. And based on the system, we are actually able to achieve the complete surgical plan within 60 seconds. And this is in contrast to the common time they used for 20 minutes or even longer. And we're able to actually achieve a sub-millimeter point annotation accuracy for selecting the surgical target. So this is actually quite great for general surgical trajectory planning and even beyond deep brain stimulation for other parts of body as well. In the next part, I'm going to talk about brain tumor resection. So this is actually going to apply the AI principles. And most importantly, for designing a surgical AI, we're really focusing on how do we incorporate intuitive intraoperative feedback metrics for the kind of system. And more specifically, we're going to introduce two works. The very first one is how do we perform intermodal anatomical landmark detection? And then the second is how do we automatically assess the MRI and also intraoperative ultrasound restoration quality? So just trying to give you a background why we're very interested in the brain tumor surgery. So for most of the neurosurgery that requires craniotomy, brain shift or tissue shift is a really major problem. Essentially, this kind of phenomenon will move the surgical target and also other vital structures such as blood vessels. And that's what pretty much invalidate the pre-surgical plans. And this is really due to various factors like gravity and also drug administration. And the really annoying part is that for whatever the tissue deformation underneath the surface of the brain, we don't tend to see them. So it creates a lot more risk for the patient if we're trying to go all the way in to cut any tissue we want. And the current solution, there are multiple. For more expensive equipment and also some more fancy hospitals, people can actually use intraoperative MRI, which is a lot more expensive. But alternatively, people have also been using intraoperative ultrasound, which is a lot more accessible to detect the tissue. However, as you can see on the demonstration on the screen, you have the ultrasound, but it's not very easy to read. At the same time, we do need some level of realignment between the intraoperative ultrasound, which takes in the account of the tissue shift with the preoperative MRI, so that we'll be able to update all of the preoperative plans we have. So we're making sure that whatever the tissue that we need to resect is really going to be resected. Another problem with this kind of AI algorithm development is that there's really not a lot of data we can use. So to tackle this, we actually published a open access data set called Resect. So this data set is in collaboration with the Sintef in Norway. We have 23 brain tumor cases with the matching MRI and intraoperative ultrasound. And we basically select all the ultrasound throughout the whole process of the surgery and then give corresponding landmarks between the preoperative MRI and also pre-section intraoperative and also post-resection ultrasound. So that we'll be able to continuously track how much of brain shift there is. And then we'll be able to use it as a benchmark tool and also develop database for building algorithm to tackle the brain shift tracking issue. So with this kind of database, we have been running public challenges. Some of you probably are familiar with those Kaggle challenges. It's kind of similar and quite popular nowadays. So we've been running challenges for 3 years, trying to recruit different teams all over the world, trying to solve this difficult problem. This is called Curious Challenge. And essentially, we give them all the data. And also, we have 10 reserved test cases and trying to ask people to perform registration between MRI and ultrasound. And then we're going to record the landmark registration error, which is actually quite intuitive to use because it gives you spatial information regarding how much error it is in critical areas of the surgery or less critical areas. So as we mentioned, landmarks are really great, intuitive, desirable metric for registration quality evaluation. So this is actually well acknowledged in the community in general. However, landmark tagging requires high domain expertise, labor, and time. For anyone who has done this, can pretty much testify this. It's a very long time and effort to do this. Although in the clinic, it's very good to have those things to give you validation for how well the images align with the patient and also with the preoperative images. It's not very easy to do so, so it's not quite great for clinical application, although it's desirable. So my student Serena, this is where he actually had the idea of trying to use AI algorithm to automatically tag these landmarks. So in general, landmark tagging for radiological applications is not exactly new. So a lot of these cases actually happen for standardized MRI for the brain or other parts of the bones, so like the femur or the skull. However, often these kind of landmarks have very systematic protocols, and you're only dealing with one contrast. But when it comes to trying to match between MRI and ultrasound, of course, you have very large disparity in terms of image contrast and features. So trying to find out what exactly is matching, it's not very easy. And at the same time, the usual case of CT is that you have a very canonical orientation of the images. So it's really easy to tag things. But for the ultrasound, it can come from different orientations, and also the general structure or whatever is in the image can vary a lot between cases and subjects. And at the same time, even though we do have relatively consistent protocol for the landmarks, the specific landmark location will really up to where the tumor will be. And very lastly, we don't really have a huge amount of data, even though we have a public database compared with a typical AI development where you have a huge amount of database to develop the algorithm. So how do we solve this? So here, we're going to use a technique called contrast learning. So contrast learning is a fairly data efficient way of training an AI model if you don't have a huge amount of data, because we do use some level of permutation to constantly compare different data set. So in general, we're going to have 3 types of a data point. One is called anchor. The other one is positive image, which is belong to the same class of your anchor. For example, you have a dog, and then you have positive image. It's also a picture of dog. And then you also have a negative image, which is actually, for example, a cat, which is different from the dog. So what we're trying to do with contrast learning is trying to maximize the similarity between the positive pairs while minimize the energy or similarity between the negative pairs in the hypermanifold space. So this is going to help with the feature learning, trying to understand what exactly do you mean when there's a picture of a dog or a picture of a cat. So for this kind of a training algorithm, we're actually be able to compare similar or basically matching location of the landmarks with those that are not matched, and then eventually train a AI feature encoder, so we'll be able to have it abstract a very concise representation of what does it mean that their location between MRI and ultrasound are matching. And then in this way, we'll be able to perform similarity comparison. And for efficient purposes, instead of using directly 3D blocks, we're actually using a 2.5D approach. Basically means that you're going to have all the crossing planes, all 3 of them. together, and then trying to match a template landmark neighborhood image patch in the MRI with the ultrasound image, so that once the similarity is high enough, then we'll be able to locate the matched landmark in the ultrasound. And this is really the first time the contrast learning approach have been used in the intermodal landmark matching. And we have achieved accuracy of around 5.88 millimeter for annotating or localizing the landmarks in ultrasound. This is, I know this is probably not really that great compared with a lot of cases neurosurgery require a 7 millimeter accuracy. However, this is compared to the SIFT algorithm, which is a more classic way of doing things, which it gave you around 19 millimeter accuracy. This is a huge improvement already. Of course, landmark is great. So you gave a little bit more classic interpretation about how registration accuracy should be. This is a really classic thinking, very intuitive. However, can we actually give another way of offering feedback for the clinicians for registration accuracy? So this is where we're trying to directly estimate errors between image patches between MR and ultrasound. So give you directly the millimeters rather than trying to count where the landmarks will be, because there are still issues with where you can actually tag a landmark. So what we're trying to use is the attention mechanism in the deep learning. So for some of you probably are familiar with the case of transformers. This is where a lot of the large language models such as ChatGPT has been using. So this kind of AI algorithm does not use the typical convolution operations such as the convolutional neural network. And what it does is that it's actually going to decompose the image into a sequence of image patches, pretty much as like a words, like all the words in a sentence. And then we'll be able to apply mutual tensions between these patches and try to know what exactly is more important for the specific task. And this has been incredibly useful for a large amount of applications. So for our case, we kind of compared the potential of between transformers, and there's a little bit later of a different type of attention model called the focal modulation. So for attention model with the transformers, you tend to actually look at the patches that kind of looks like a matrix, a grid, and try and find out what exactly is the importance with respect to each other in the image. And in the focal modulation, you're going to focus on a single point in the image and then trying to find out the relationship or importance in the concentric image patches at different scales. So in this case, this is a kind of similar or very advantageous for estimating generally the discrepancy or errors between the registration of MRI and ultrasound, because you're looking at image and then what you really care about is the content at the center, and you're paying less attention at the broader context, but everything is actually relatively related to a concentric attention. So utilizing the focal modulation model, I assume again Serena, have also incorporated the robustness of recurrent residual network. So in this case, we designed 4 hierarchical levels for the image patches and directly trying to predict the mean 3D patch-wise registration error between MRI and intraoperative ultrasound. So to really provide the training samples, we actually managed to make a silver ground truth. So we're going to use the landmarks to perform B-spline registration between MRI and ultrasound, so they're going to be very well aligned. And then we're going to apply artificial deformation as our samples to train our network. And to really give a little bit more double assurance for our network, and in addition to give the result for the misregistration errors, we also performed something called the Monte Carlo dropout. So give you a representation as a standard deviation of all the potential solution you might have. So this gives you the uncertainty regarding how sure you are about the error that you have regressed. So this gives you a double insurance regarding how much I should trust the machine, and give you a little bit more better feedback mechanism for an AI algorithm. So what does the result looks like? In general, for our system, we have achieved absolute error for basically predicting the misregistration for around 0.6 millimeter, which is actually considering for the MRI solution. This is typically at 1 by 1 by 1 millimeter isotropic. And this is the very first technique ever developed and tested with real clinical data for this kind of application. And in general, for the uncertainty measures, we have also found out that the uncertainty measure we have proposed can also be reliable used to gauge whether our AI algorithm output is reliable or not. So here we have a little bit more result in a scatter plot and trying to decode how much a reliable ability or accuracy our result really is. So the first graph on the leftmost is a correlation between the predicted error and also the actual ground truth. We actually achieved the 82% of correlation, which is a really high result for reliable predicting the actual errors. And in the second graph, we plot the correlation between the prediction error versus the uncertainty. So this is trying to gauge how much we can actually trust uncertainty estimation as a surrogate to know the reliability of our AI output. So 70% correlation is actually pretty good. And lastly, we're trying to see for the more classic image resolution metric, which is mutual information, how much this is actually correlated with our uncertainty as well. So this is another dimension of trying to validate how much our uncertainty estimation is reliable for giving out the result. So we can also have about negative 67% of correlation. This is also significant. It's really great to validate that our uncertainty and also accuracy of the algorithm is valid and also quite helpful. However, for this case, what we're trying to regress is basically based on patch-to-patch misregistration and give you one single measure in millimeter, which is actually intuitive. However, for cases where we have a lot of images, we also would like to see a dense map, trying to look at where the misregistration really is happening. So my sister and I pushed this even further. So we designed this Siamese network. And then based on the training of the network, we're trying to map the image features of MRI and ultrasound together. And then eventually using a transformer-based UNet model in 3D, trying to directly predict a registration error map. It's a very dense map and give you the actual millimeter-wise misregistration over the entire space. And then for this model, we have achieved a, again, 0.5 millimeter accuracy in terms of our error prediction. And the even great things is that the average runtime for this model is basically within 2 seconds. So compare with the slowly tagging landmarks in surgery and trying to figure out what exactly is misregistration, it's actually quite helpful not to overburden the surgical time. So in the third part of the talk, I'm going to talk about the case of using obtrusive visual feedback in surgical augmented reality. This is particularly useful for cerebrovascular diseases. And more specifically, I'm going to introduce a little bit of an interesting gadget we're trying to develop. It's called Intelligent Augmented Surgical Microscope. So microscope, especially for surgical microscope, is quite useful, particularly for neurosurgery, but other parts of the body as well. It does provide the magnification, additional lighting, and also a precision of movement for surgical applications where you really have to focus on very specific spot for the surgery. And this is our general proposal. So a lot of time, the surgeon will have to do the operation with the optical device. However, with the development of these hardware, we are actually able to inject additional digital information into this the view of the surgeon as well at the same time. And we're trying to think about how we can actually utilize this kind of incredible tool to not give extra full kind of like the additional hardware in the operating room while give them enough information to help with their work. So this is kind of trying to propose augmented reality visualization that directly inject the useful information into the microscope that they have been using directly. So In the cerebrovascular surgery, quite often we have to repair the pathology of the blood vessels. And in this case, a lot of time we'll have to decide to clip certain vessels and then trying to operate on the pathology. However, in this case, we have to know the relationship regarding the feeding or drainer, like feeding direction of the blood. Because if you clip the wrong direction, the blood vessel might actually explode, then your patient might have very catastrophic outcomes. However, in the operating room, if you ever see the general tissue, it does not look like in the textbook. The veins is blue and then artery is red. So everything's pretty much red. And in this case, we have to figure out a way, how do we know that which direction the blood is being drained so that we don't make mistakes? So there are a lot of different ways of doing so nowadays. The number one is injected dye. So you can actually using fluorescent light and trying to use injected dye to observe how the blood actually goes through the vessels and trying to figure out where things are. And secondly, you can still use Doppler ultrasound, naturally be able to tell the direction of the blood flow. And lastly, you can also have the more classic augmented reality, basically adding the pre-operative image that you have annotated during the surgery. So you'll be able to see more or less what's going on. However, all these three methods will have their own drawbacks. For the injected dye, the problem is that you only get 10 seconds to see everything. And if you want to go for a second round, and then you have to wait for 15 minutes or more for a second round of injection. So that whole thing is going to be flashing out of the body system. And for some patients, they do actually have allergy towards those contrast agents as well. And in terms of Doppler ultrasound, for sure you're applying pressure on the already fragile blood vessel walls. So if you're not being very careful, probably a burst of aneurysm as well. So it's not something you have to be kind of taken very easily. It's quite stressful. And very lastly, with the more classic augmented reality with the pre-operative images, as we mentioned, there's a brain shift issue, and then a lot of time there's a mismatch between the pre-operative images and also whatever you have seen during the surgery. So that's kind of a problem. I don't know how many of you have seen this research before. This is from MIT. This technique is called the Eulerian video magnification. So you can see that normally we don't see our face is actually changing colors in the arithmetic way. However, by trying to amplify the temporal information, we'll be able to reconstruct the video clips so that we can see the actual position of the blood in our tissues. So this person, even though on the normal video taking scenarios, we won't see this, but after magnification, we'll be able to see the actual visible position of the blood. So utilizing this kind of principles, we have devised a similar technique. So this is directly taking the video footages from the surgical microscope, which is contactless, and we only needed 5 to 10 seconds of the footages. We can directly see the position of the blood. And if you're trying to apply the power spectral analysis, you can also observe the differences within the blood vessels. So this is the case for aneurysm. We can see that here the feeding vessels tend to have a stronger position, and then the draining ones actually have weaker positions. You can see this red as the strong and then blue as the weak. So this gave you a very direct visualization that can be directly injected into the microscopic view for displaying information, also guiding surgery. So this is done by my student Reed Basil and also in collaboration with my postdoc supervisor, Tara Peters at Western University. So in terms of giving feedback as colors, this is basically one way of doing so, but you can also try to give directly the directions. So we know that time shift will also result in phase shift. And then in this case, by extracting the phase difference in the adjacent points, we can also directly request the direction of blood as well. So this really gave us a more intuitive way of figure out where it's going. And then with the control, that's easier to deal with, we're trying to incorporate also the iPad. So in the surgical application, we also would like to have a little bit more manual manipulation of the data. So in this case, we could actually use an iPad to allow the surgeon to directly draw the region of interest for analysis. and then basically trying to improve the usability, interactability, also applicability of what we have seen so far. And this is in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Etienne Leger, and also Dr. Martha Kirsten Hotel at Concordia University. And Etienne is right now a research associate at the Montreal Neurological Institute. And very lastly, I'm going to talk about not the brain this time, but for thoracic surgery. So essentially, we're trying to see how can we simplify a task for trocar placement design in thoracic surgery in the surgical VR. So lung cancer is the deadliest cancer, and video-assisted thoracic surgery is used for early stage of treatment. It's quite useful. Typically, for this kind of procedure, we'll have to put the small incisions in the bodies. We're able to insert the endoscopic cameras and also the surgical instruments. So typically, you will need one port for the camera and also two ports for the surgical instruments. However, basically designing where these incisions will be, or called trocars, can have their challenges. And essentially, if you have suboptimal placement, this can reduce the surgical instrument maneuverability. This can essentially lead to a longer operating time and higher risk of complications, and potentially increase the surgical team fatigue, because there's also a lot of ergonomic factors have to be considered when you're trying to design the ports. And the wrong position holding for a long time, it's actually going to be very bad. So this is done by a work done by my student, Arash Haripush, and also in collaboration with the Dr. George Rankovic, which is the chief of surgery at the Rosemont Hospital. So in general, we're proposing a VR system for with a tailored data visualization and interaction strategies to optimize the placement of the trocar preoperatively. And very interestingly, normally for this type of surgery, you will have to design the camera port first. So you're going to insert endoscopic camera first and trying to look at the environment, and then decide where to put your the incision for the surgical tools. So this is something we're trying to do at the beginning, but then realize it's actually making things very cumbersome. So we decided to simplify this and try to reverse the order of the port placement. As a result, we designed a two-step VR workflow to do so. And the first step, we're designing a pivot mechanism for surgical instrument placement. So we're going to design the incision for surgical tools first. So in this case, we're going to first tag the surgical target point in the VR environment. And the green area you can see here is the predefined alleged area where you should actually go for your surgical tools. And then next, we're going to drag the controller of the VR controllers from the target point. And this basically representing the tool trajectory you're going to have. And then we're going to do a pivoting motion around the surgical target, so that we're going to satisfy the predefined criteria, including no bone collision, enough surgical trajectory depth, because some tools are not deep enough, and also the right manipulation angle. This is trying to give a sufficient ergonomic design for the surgeon. So once you're actually okay with it, and then we're going to press confirm. So this will be able to leave the trocars on the digital model. And at the same time, we'll give you all the visual feedback during the pivoting motion, also the final decision, and how much of the angle of the trajectory will be, and also depth of the trajectory. So if you're not happy, you can repeat it again. And in the second step, we're going to use the freehand grabbing mechanism to place the camera port. So you're going to place the camera inside, and here the field of view of the camera is represented by a cone. And at the same time, the degree of freedom for all the surgical tools are also being modeled as a cones. So our goal is trying to maximize the overlapping volume of these cones, so that the surgeon will have the maximum operable areas within the body. And again, once things are all good, we click confirm, and then we're going to compute the total volume of operable area for the user, and also visualize this in the VR system as well. So you have a very direct view about how much you can actually have in the terms of real estate in the body to perform the surgery. So for this one, we have performed a user study using 20 non-clinicians, and hopefully we'll try to expand this clinician as well. And then with these cases, we tested different metrics, including system usability scale, or short for SUS, and more nuanced user experience questionnaire, trying to testify if our visualization and also interaction strategies are actually easy to use. And very lastly, we have all these quantitative metrics trying to validate that all the statistical plan that made by these non-clinicians are still valid. So based on the result, found that we have a very great overall usability score, which is 81% or 82%, which is significantly greater than the threshold of 68%. And very greatly, we have, for all these non-clinicians, we're able to finish the stroke car placement planning within 4 minutes. And all these metrics will actually satisfy the criteria we have found in the literature in terms of trajectory distance, manipulation angle, and also the volume for common workable areas. And the very good thing is that for most of these cases, 75% of the cases, people never did any revision of their surgical plan, which actually really signifies that the usability of our system. Right. So now we have seen like 4 general areas for the work from the lab. And in general, in conclusion, we have tried very hard to actually trying to incorporate the human-centered or user-centered design in surgical AI and VR. This is done by trying to propose methods to have efficient and user-friendly design in surgical AR and virtual reality. And in addition, we're trying to figure out how do we design intuitive feedback mechanism as the output for surgical AI software, as well as have the consideration, how do we minimize the interference with the normal clinical flow? And there's still a lot of questions still remains. Number one thing is that we have a lot of new hardware and software technological development. This allows for even more novel human-computer interaction, and how do we actually incorporate that further? For example, the latest Apple augmented reality headset that have a lot of different toys we can actually play with. And second, how do we actually incorporate clinicians and human knowledge in the software system development? So there's still kind of big problem, although for AI model training, we are feeding in segmentation and also ground truth from the human raters. However, a lot of the more nuanced understanding how do you actually make decisions is very hard to be incorporated. This is also something we have been working on in the lab, trying to really model the rational and also reasoning process of performing diagnosis and trying to perform surgical planning and this knowledge into the surgical AI system. And very lastly, we are working on a lot of cases which is very out there. But if you're trying to explore different types of clinical tasks, we found that there's a lot of tasks still waiting to be solved. So there's still a lot of areas that will be very meaningful to explore how to incorporate this kind of surgical VR and AI system. So for all this work, I would like to thank all my students. So these are the current lab members, but we also have a lot of students who have graduated, which have showcased some of their work in the talk today. And lastly, I would like to acknowledge our funding sources. And thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Xiao, for that wonderful presentation. We've got a few questions in the chat. Please feel free to just unmute and ask. Saper Adani.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I said it's done.
Yeah, so it says, impressive. What was the method called? The one which visualized the pulse from video.
So yeah, this is the Eulerian video magnification, but there's also other so this is the first version, but there's also other versions as well, trying to utilizing the face information more, different filter design for the magnification. And later on, there's also AI-based or deep learning-based algorithm for this as well.
Mashid?
Yes, thank you so much for a great presentation. You know, I'm not an expert actually in AI, and that's why I'm not, I don't have a specific question, but actually the title of your presentation was interesting for me, that you mentioned human-centered surgical AI. I was curious to ask, should we expect computer-centered surgical AI in future? Because as we know, the human knowledge is mandatory for validating the AI-based systems these days. But what do we mean by human-based?
So it's a human-centered design.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned the 5 general principles and how do we actually incorporate human-centered design. Generally, how during the design, we should try to make sure that the task, when people are trying to interact with the software, is very intuitive and also simplified, so you know what you're doing and then have expected result. So of course, that's the face value of the algorithm. And then the very important part is how do you give feedback that people can more easily use or adopt or understand. This may be more obvious in case of the augmented reality and virtual reality, because you have a lot of tasks you're expecting people to do, but at the same time, how do you actually design the user interface so that people don't necessarily have to read a long menu to understand how to do so? In terms of AI, a lot of time, the general expectations that we're going to give a simple task. So give image, I'm going to have a segmentation of the heart or the brain. This is actually quite direct, but in terms of the surgical applications, different more nuanced applications, how do we actually give the input, how do we give the output that's actually going to be kind of suiting the habit of people using the images in the surgery. So for our case, we're trying to use the landmark to help with the validation of the registration, because this has been used for quite a long time in neurosurgery, trying to tag these kind of anatomical landmarks to verify whether 2 images are sufficiently aligned, and then trying to see if we should proceed further. Another layer is trying to incorporate uncertainty of the models, how to give a metric of uncertainty so that you can trust the result what you have and understand what's the magnitude of uncertainty relation to the actual output. And in terms of uncertainty, there are a lot of different ways you can compute the metric. It can be entropy, it can be probability. But our case, we decided to use a standard deviation of different kind of version of answers, which is in millimeter. So the uncertainty in millimeter give you a more direct understanding how much of variation that result can be in contrast to a probability or entropy, which is does not have any physical unit attached, will be much harder to understand.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dr. Xiao. Really wonderful. I like the whole analysis of the brain and the tumors, the contrast learning, etc. So as I understand it, during brain surgery, intraoperative brain, so there's brain shift. So how does your contrast learning approach account for brain shift during surgery to maintain accurate landmark detection and registration? And also you talked about error estimation method. So how do you account for the intraoperative brain shifts, and how does it update the, you talked about the registration.
So we're not directly tackling the registration algorithm, but rather we're trying to provide a way to validate or assess the quality of registration, because there are a lot of different algorithms. And even for some of the vendors, they also provide some preliminary version of the ultrasound to MR registration. The biggest question is, how do we know that the registration failed? So it does fail. And when it fails, we have to know how and how much. So our task here is really trying to figure out a quick way to give you the answer whether the registration is good or not.
Okay. So do you do is this patient-specific and anatomical variation? Do you modeling? Is it patient-specific what you are talking about?
This is not patient specific. So we actually have 23 brain tumor cases that we use for validation development of the algorithm. And in addition, we also did a lot of data augmentation. So generally, we're trying to simulate different scenarios of brain shift and then trying to see how well the model performs. But for sure, we still have a relatively small data set. So right now we're trying to get more data, trying to expand this experiment as well.
Yeah, so my last question refers to the validation methods that you are using. I was just learning about your dense error maps. So I may have missed what strategies you use to validate the accuracy of your dense error maps.
Yeah, that's a good question. So similar to our error regression task, we actually do obtain silver ground truth for MRI to ultrasound alignment using anatomical landmarks. So we have nonlinear transformation based on these landmarks, and then we artificially augment misalignment to simulate brain shift at different variety of severities. And then in this case, we have used these ones for our validation and training purposes.
Okay. Anybody has any question?
I have a few questions. As someone who's used ultrasound a lot in neurosurgery, one of the problems you run into is it's relatively simple to do an ultrasound, at the beginning of the case, because you can put your ultrasound in any position you want, as long as you have access to that part of the brain.
Right.
And then as soon as you start the operation, your brain shifts. The ultrasound probe is not in the right position anymore. You have to switch the ultrasound probe. And then what happens is that you have blood that's occurring in the field, especially along the edge, and then any type of air, little bubbles that occur on the edge, which occur during an operative procedure, and little microhemorrhages, and interfere with the whole picture. So one of the big issues you have is one of technical concern related to the fact that the ultrasounds and the ultrasound images do not represent what you really are seeing during the operation. So how do you deal with that sort of technical problem? And I realize you have a small data set, and I suspect that your data set is a number of ultrasounds that are done in a perfect situation, but that's not usually what happens.
So I'm not the one who collect the data, but usually for these data collection, I think there's some amount of like saline water that's being patted in the area, trying to make sure things are all well visualized. There are also a lot of different ways to tackle this. So whatever you're actually visualizing is trying to give you a general context regarding how much brain shift really happened. Although for the resection area, you will actually have the blood coagulation and also a lot of different artifacts at the borders. You still have a certain amount of context in terms of other tissues you have not resected. And basically, based on the context of the neighbors, you will still be able to basically infer how much the deformation happened. And then you'll be able to correct these kind of shifts based on the pre-operative MRI. And then this will be able to give you some clue regarding where you are at the moment in terms of the resection progress. But yeah, in the technical part is going to be a little bit more on how you're actually going to use additional medium to actually try to reduce the artifact you might have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have another question in the chat by Abikumaran. Yeah, it says, thank you for the insightful lecture and your hard work. Can attention mechanisms capture fine spatial details, for example, tumor boundary, localization, or spatial irregularity, heterogeneity in CNN feature extraction for tumor resections? And I think there's also another question: what are the limits of its captured long-range dependencies? And also, have you considered using fractal or multifractal index for this problem, or wavelet analysis?
Okay, thank you for the question. I guess we'll go with the first one. So for attention mechanism, it is able to actually capture more nuanced tissue differences. So there's a kind of match combination regarding CNN features extract from. So the transformer model have a different mechanism than CNN, which does not use convolution. So with this kind of model, you are able to actually capture quite nuanced behavior of the images, really depending on how you model your image patches. So it's really about the context that you have. Generally, for what we have for segmenting subtissue types within the brain tumors, transformers have done pretty well already as well. So the very well-known BRASS challenge, people have used different kinds of attention models for this purpose. For the second, so what are the limitations of capturing long range dependency? So long dependency is really trying to see the context of the importance for specific local regions or local features. Of course, if you're trying to only model long range dependency, where for transformers, you parse the image into different patches or tokens, as we call, you are going to lose some level of local feature descriptions. So this is also why nowadays people have tried to combine transformers with the convolutional neural network as a hybrid model. So you're trying to take advantage of both long range dependency modeling and also the local feature extractions at the same time. So this is also really, really helpful for medical images. And for the question, have you considered using fractal or multifractal index for this problem or wavelet analysis? So for deep learning, the funny part is that we're trying to look at some of the filters that we have learned at the early stage. A lot of these filters actually do resemble the wavelet representation. So wavelet basically is trying to basically model the local features at different hierarchical levels. And with the CNN or deep learning in general, we are going to extract this inexplicitly. So there have been kind of interesting study on how to reduce the amount of training data by directly replacing the early filters of the CNN with wavelet transformed or wavelet-based functions. So this has shown that it is able to actually reduce the amount of data used for training. However, so far, since we have a lot more data, I guess people are not really using that as much. In general, for a little bit more nuanced metric or index, I think these index tend to be used more often for more classic machine learning algorithms for tissue classifications. Of course, for a lot of the deep learning ones, if you actually have transform images with this kind of index map, and you should be able to actually get a different way of interpreting image, and sometimes can be beneficial for sure.
Thank you.
This is exciting. Yeah, and thank you very much, Dr. Xiao.
Thank you very much.
This is excellent work, really wonderful. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending the seminar, and wish you a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.